It's your Friday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day. Final show of the week. Hope you guys are having a good day out there today, and a lot of good stuff coming up on today's show. Andrew Krammer from the Star Tribune joins me here in just a little bit to talk Vikings. He is in Indianapolis right now for the NFL Scouting Combine. All sorts of interesting stuff happening there. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the Vikings GM, and Kevin O'Connell, Vikings head coach, talked earlier this week about all sorts of stuff. Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, where they stand with contracts, things like that. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Also, the quarterbacks that the Vikings are looking at are throwing on Saturday. The Viking quarterbacks take center stage today with interviews with the media, and Saturday with on-field work. So I can't really remember a team going into the Combine where there's a big free agent question looming at quarterback with the Vikings and Kirk Cousins, but also that team is looking heavily at drafting a quarterback. It's a fascinating spot for the Vikings to be in, and Andrew and I will get into that here in just a little bit. Also, a roster move for the Vikings that I'll get to towards the end of the show, in addition to a big announcement from Caitlin Clark, the Iowa basketball star. First, though, what I missed is going to be a hockey-heavy opening segment here on Daily Delivery. The Wild, let's start there. Lost to Nashville 6-1 last night, and if you can't see the end of the road right now, you can kind of see it off in the distance. They're 8 points back now in the wild card race. They're bunched up still with like three other teams that are right there with them. LA won last night as well, so the Kings and the Predators are both 8 points clear of the Wild now, kind of separated themselves from the rest of the pack. Still, like, the season's not like over. There's still like a third of the year left, so you can't say season over, but the Wild can kind of see the end from here. If they don't win tomorrow night in St. Louis, you can kind of say, okay, that's for all intents and purposes, that could feel like the end, especially because the trade deadline is 1 week from today, and you could see them unload some players. Again, they can't move a lot of guys because they have these no-move contracts, so they're not going to make like these massive wholesale changes, but you could see some minor tweaks, give the younger guys a chance to play in the final month and a half of the season, things like that. But for now, 6-1 in a game where you kind of have to have it, right? They're down 6 points to the Predators going in. A win gets them within 4 of Nashville, regulation win. So you're thinking, okay, this is where they kind of unload everything. This is where they have to have their best effort. I just don't feel like they had that from the jump. Neither did head coach John Hines. Here he was after the game.
I thought from a competitive standpoint, we weren't close to where we needed to be in a lot of areas of the ice. You know, and you could arguably say tonight we got what we deserved. We didn't put enough into the game that gives you a chance to win this time of year, and you saw the end result.
And look, sometimes we say effort as a proxy for talent and skill. Like sometimes we don't want to say a team just isn't good enough. I think that might be the case with the Wild. I think they gave a curious first period effort in this game, that they didn't come out looking as sharp and as focused as they could be, but that's going to wane and wax through the year. That's kind of how the Wild have been this year, right? Like when they get good goaltending, when they don't give up 1 billion power play goals, when that, they can be a decent team. They can be a pretty good team. They can put together a run like they did right after the All-Star break where they went like 7-1-1, something like that during that stretch. They put together that. They kind of got back into the fringes of the wild card race. They've kind of done that a few times this year, and maybe they'll do that one more time this year, but there's enough inconsistencies with this team, enough where you just feel like this is finally the year where they are feeling the impact of the Ryan Suter and Zach Parise buyouts. It's just, it hasn't caught up to them yet until this year. They've got another year of it next year. You just start to wonder, okay, where is the future of this? Where is the direction going until you get to that 25-26 season, which feels far away, right? It feels like you got another year of this. How are you going to navigate this when you know you've got problems coming ahead? It's not like the NFL where you can backload contracts. Like any contract in the NHL hits the cap exactly the same every single year. You can't like say, okay, we're going to sign somebody to a 3-year, $30 million contract, but only 5 of it's going to count next year. Then we'll spread the rest over the next 2 years after we're kind of out of this cap jail. Can't do that in the NHL. So they're kind of stuck in this space. And for now, it just kind of feels like they're not good enough, right? You'd like to see a better effort, a better focused effort in this game against Nashville, but it just seems like by and large, they're just not quite good enough. And they're going to have to face that music, and maybe they're going to make some trades before we get too far into next week. Let's go down one level. College hockey. This caught my eye yesterday. A little fuel for Abby Murphy's considerable fire as the Gophers women's hockey team prepares for the WCHA playoffs starting today against MSU Mankato. Abby Murphy, the nation's leading goal scorer, plays for the Gophers, excellent forward for the Gophers, could only make second team all WCHA, second team forward in her conference, even though she's leading the nation in scoring. Now, two reasons for this I can imagine. One, the competition in the conference is very fierce. The three forwards who got first team, they're very good, right? Kirsten Sims and Casey O'Brien from Wisconsin. They're 1-2 in the nation in scoring, not goals, but scoring, goals and assists combined. And then Ohio State, Hannah Bilka, she also made it. She's up there in points, although considerably lower than Abby Murphy. And they are number one in the nation, number one in the WCHA overall. So they're number one in the pairwise. They're a very, very good team. So you can't say, okay, there's players who didn't necessarily deserve it, but Abby Murphy's leading the nation in goals. How does she get left off the first team, only make second team? Well, you got this competition, but you've also got the fact that she is not very well liked, it seems. She gets into scraps. She gets a lot of penalties. She is a feisty player by her own admission. You just watch her, you know that. So I have to wonder if part of that is playing into this voting as well. So I don't know. It'll be interesting if she uses that as motivation. I don't know if she needs extra motivation, but uses that as motivation as they advance and continue in the playoffs, especially if they see some of these other teams in the deeper rounds of the postseason. And finally, one level lower than that, high school hockey had a massive upset. I don't talk a lot of high school hockey here because we have a separate high school sports podcast. Those guys do a great job. Chanhassen taking down undefeated defending state champion Minnetonka in the section final on Thursday, 2-1. Massive upset. I mean, some people are saying, one of the biggest upsets in section playoff history. I mean, I've seen plenty of them in my day. I covered a lot of high school hockey back when I was doing high school sports 15, 20 years ago. I've seen some big upsets, but this one, even just from an outside perspective, someone who doesn't follow it all that closely now, does seem like a massive upset. Tons of people, chiming in on social media on Thursday night. It's like one of the top read stories on our sports section this morning on StarTribune.com. Like, this is a major upset. So go read that story. Check that out. Chanhassen going to the state tournament for the first time. Minnetonka, which won the big school tournament last year, going home, didn't make it this year after a massive upset on Thursday.
Grand Casino would like to take a moment and salute the true football fan. The passion, the hope, the anticipation, that incomparable feeling of winning. Grand Casino would also like to take a moment to remind you that you can find all that anticipation, thrill, and winning at Grand Casino. Grand Casino, let your story begin.
I've got Andrew Krammer with me today from Indianapolis. Andrew is there with our colleague Ben Gessling covering the NFL Scouting Combine. Andrew, you guys did an Access Vikings podcast the other day. You should go listen to that. But I wanted to catch up with you just on maybe some of the stuff you and Ben have already talked about. But we expected this to be a fairly newsy combine just based on what we know about all the decisions facing the Vikings, the quarterbacks that are available in the draft that they're definitely going to get a long look at here in the next couple days. What's kind of the if you're going to put a headline on what's happened so far from the Vikings perspective, where do you see that as right now?
Yeah, I would say the headline would be that the Vikings are even more enamored, if that's possible, with this draft class of quarterbacks. They've had their eye on it for some time. Obviously, Caleb Williams and Drake May have been, the pie in the sky dream. But after sitting down with Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, it became clear that they have liked even more of their options. And how much of that's posturing with Kirk Cousins, I'm not sure. But it is clear to me that they like beyond the top two options of Caleb and Drake. Potentially even a J.J. McCarthy, certainly a Jaden Daniels. They've met with all of these guys here in their stadium suite at Lucas Oil. And Kwesi said, it's nice to sit down with these guys and get confirmed what you thought was good about them. which is much different rhetoric than he had the last couple of years when we were going through the quarterback evaluations and much more maligned classes, classes that didn't have the talent that this class is thought to have. And the Vikings really, really do seem to like a lot of their options here. They also still want to keep Kirk Cousins. And we've talked about this. When they broke for the season on January 10th or whatever it was, they left that season intending to double down on their quarterback position after all the turmoil last year. 2 months ago, they wanted to re-sign Kirk and they wanted to make a run at drafting the next guy. I don't think any of that's changed. And like I said, if anything, once they got up close and saw these quarterbacks in the draft, I'm sure they think with pick number 11, they're in a good spot to get their guy, even if that needs to be trading up to go get him.
Where do we think then? You said they're still interested in bringing Kirk Cousins back. They've said all the right things about that when they had the public news conference on Tuesday where both O'Connell and Kwesi Ofosu-Mensah talked. Kevin O'Connell just started talking about Cousins was throwing as well as anyone when he got hurt. You could tell that he's got a certain affinity for him, that he wants him around. It's always been this question of for how long, at what price, what are the terms. A lot of that's going to have to do with what Cousins' market is because, Andrew, let's be honest, like at any point in 2022 or 2023, they could have made Kirk Cousins an offer that he couldn't refuse, right? Like they could have had Kirk Cousins locked up for a long time, and they've instead did the 1-year deal in 2022 that that got him one more year of Cousins, and then before 2023 they did the deal where it was basically like, we're just going to kind of go into 2023, let this play out. We're going to put this dead money on here just to ease the cap burden. So I'm trying to understand A, what's changed at this point, but B, kind of where the market might lead them in this case.
I don't think anything's changed. I think they've always wanted Kirk at a specific price. And to your point, they're not making an offer that he can't refuse. So they're not giving him let's say he wants 3 years fully guaranteed like he got when he signed here in 2018. They have not offered him that. My understanding was a year ago, they put 3 different contracts on the table for him, and his side chose the 1 year with the no trade clause. And that's just what they wanted in terms of the guaranteed money that was available, the overall value that was available. And so now I don't think anything's changed. I think they still have their line, and Kirk and his agent, Mike McCartney, are very good at testing the market and getting the most out of it. They're very storied and have a deep history of doing that from Washington to Minnesota. So I think they're going to try and do that again. That's what they are doing. Kirk has put the full court press on them, from dancing at the NFL honors thing, showing off his Achilles repair, to the video that he put out on Monday, which was not a coincidence that it was right at the start of Combine Week. Kirk's camp is trying to drum up that interest the best that they can to then hold the Vikings' feet to the fire and say, look, if we've got X deal over here from whatever team, can you match it? Can you up your offer? And my understanding is that the Vikings have not budged on what they're willing to give him. This isn't a Justin Jefferson situation where they're saying, okay, we'll keep getting closer to your line and keep trying to be aggressive about this. They're going to wait it out, and Kirk's going to make them sweat. And we're going to see this over the next 2 weeks. And it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. So with Kirk, I don't think anything's changed. I think they've always had their line with him. And I think they're going to stand by that. And it's just a matter of, does Kirk come back and accept that after he sees what's out there? And they're in the process of doing that this week. They're going to do it next week as well. This might be something that goes up until May 11th or March 11th or 12th, yeah, right before the start of free agency. And that's the fascinating part about it, because the injury throws a wrench into it, the age does, but their personal evaluation of Kirk, you can see it from the general manager perspective too. Kwesi has already changed his rhetoric about Kirk. A year ago, he was talking about how, well, he's pretty good on schedule and people don't, give him enough credit for that. And then this time around, he's saying, we know we can win the ultimate prize with this guy. That's the first time he's really flatly said that. And I believe that after they saw him play in 8 games, in the last 6 to 8 quarters they saw him play, beating the 49ers, trouncing Green Bay before tearing his Achilles, was some of the best football we've seen him play in Minnesota. And so they think there's no reason why they can't continue that, but they're also going to be smart about trying to be rational about trying not to overpay for a guy that frankly has maximized his value year after year.
Well, and then part of what Kwesi said too is that they're not promising Justin Jefferson anything in terms of who his quarterback will be. So that was interesting. Obviously, it's a fact. You can't promise Justin Jefferson who your quarterback's going to be, but that was interesting. But the other part that's interesting, like you said, is what exactly is Kirk Cousins' market? And that's, I think that's still yet to be established, but it's probably getting fleshed out a little bit here at the combine. Do you have a sense of like, is there a team that's just like really like all in on Kirk Cousins, or is this enough where people are like cautious enough about spending, not in this mode where they feel like a veteran quarterback's going to push them over the top, enough good quarterbacks available in the draft that the market that he thought might be there might not be as strong as he might want it to be, even if he is the best quarterback available in free agency potentially?
Yeah, you named a great factor there in terms of the quarterback class, meaning that QB needy teams are not going to be forcing money to the table here in March, fearing that they can't find their solution here 6 weeks later. That's a huge factor. Another huge factor is that Justin Fields is available. That's such a big factor because this quarterback free agent class is not great. So Kirk is the cream of the crop. But that if you can trade a third or a fourth round pick or whatever and pry Fields out of Chicago, and you might not have to pry because they seem to want to get rid of him because they're going to get Caleb Williams. That's another factor. So if it's a team like Atlanta, who would seem like a good fit for Kirk in terms of the play caller, Zach Robinson coming from Los Angeles, the skill talent they've got. Our colleague Gessling has talked about how much time Kirk spends in Atlanta in the offseason. His wife is from there. Like that would seem to be a natural fit. But if Atlanta prefers Justin Fields, a rookie contract, a young guy that might be the long-term solution for 10 years, not just the next few years, that could throw a total wrench into one of the big possible suitors for him. And then you look around the league, there's not that many other teams that are that desperate. You think of Pittsburgh, you think of Las Vegas. I don't know if these are teams that generally break the bank to sign not journeyman, but free agent veteran quarterbacks. So that's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. And I do think the draft plays a factor into it. Justin Fields is going to be a huge domino to fall in that chain. I do not get the sense that there's one or two teams that are saying, yes, this is our ultimate plan. We need to go get Kirk Cousins. I could certainly not know about a certain team that's going to do that, but I feel like the Vikings, from every sense we've gotten here in Indianapolis, the Vikings very, very much feel like they're still in it for Kirk. They just know he's going to make them sweat.
Which is different than when they got him in 2018. I feel like there were four teams that were essentially like identified as the people that were going after him. It was the Jets, the Broncos. I can't remember what the fourth team was, but there was, it was kind of a bidding war, and he ended up coming to Minnesota. I think it came out later that maybe there was a little bit more money on the table with, I think the Jets were offering a little bit more, but he thought this was a more stable situation where he could win. But that's a little different. And obviously, 6 years later, when he was a free agent before, he was going into his age 30 season, I believe. Now he's going into his age 36 season. That's different. Coming off the Achilles, and frankly, like we've seen him for 6 years, he's been good, but he's been kind of the same guy he was in Washington. Hasn't elevated the Vikings to some loftier standard, and here they are still 6 years later. So it's kind of the same guy. So that piece of it's interesting to me, and maybe teams are kind of understanding what they're getting in. And he's a much more known commodity now than he was probably 6 years ago when he was part of that class. And what's interesting to me too is like everybody probably knew that this was going to be a pretty good quarterback class. Like we've seen that coming. So I'm kind of surprised that maybe they preferred that 1 year deal a year ago, knowing that if he was going to hit free agency right now, it was going to be at a time where a team might be able to address their quarterback through the draft and not have to do it through free agency.
Yeah, but that's Kirk. Kirk has always bet on himself. He's always been the guy who still is jaded about not having a ton of offers out of high school. He's the same guy who's jaded about being a fourth round pick, jaded that Bruce Allen wouldn't give him anything more than a franchise tag in Washington. He holds on to that and he wears it. And I think that edge is what drove them into saying, you know what, make us a free agent soon and we'll take our chances the way that we always have. I don't know if they were really looking at the quarterback draft class, but I'm sure they were looking at the free agent veteran group. And frankly, Kirk is the best option by far. They could not foresee that Justin Fields would all of a sudden become available. That really messes a lot up for them potentially. But I do think that this is a guy that will continually bet on himself. And what's fascinating is that if he comes back to the Vikings, is he again going to choose a short-term deal? Is he again going to say, you know what, let me go and prove that I'm healthy off this Achilles for 1 year. You guys are going to draft your guy anyway. Just then let me go next year after a full year, of health, theoretically. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. It's just, it will be fascinating to see what he eventually agrees to if it is coming back to Minnesota, because I'm sure, like there have been in the past, he will have multiple options to choose from.
If it was 1 year or one with another year that was like a partial guarantee with some sort of like option trigger, something like that, that's far more easy for me to stomach. Like all along, I've been imagining that if he was going to come back here, it was going to have to be a multi-year deal, which to me kind of negated a lot of the appeal of drafting a quarterback. You're burning 2 years. I know that that's worked some places, like it works for Green Bay. Doesn't seem like a lot of other people are using that formula, though, because part of the cheat code of having a young quarterback is that you get all those years of rookie scale contract. Like, if you're saying to me, and again, this is just it's a little speculative at this point, but if you're saying to me there might be a possibility where he tests the market and has to come back here on a deal that's framed more like 1 year or like 1, 2-ish if he plays well, if they decide that's what they want to do, that's a lot more easy for me to digest than thinking about multiple years of guaranteed money for Kirk Cousins, especially with the what's ahead of them, what else they have to kind of contend with in the division, in the conference, and what else they have to address on this roster.
Now, it's not only easy for you to stomach, it's easier for the Vikings to stomach
Yeah.
too, which is why I think we have this line that they've got and this line that they just have not crossed. And this isn't to say that they haven't offered him in the past 3 years fully guaranteed recently. It just wasn't at the level of dollars that he wanted. So they can offer the structure that Kirk wants, but if it's then below the value, like those two things need to equate for him, and they just haven't to get a long-term deal in Minnesota. And he's going to be somebody that if he's going to sign something longer than a 2-year deal, it's going to have to be baked into the fact that more and more money every year becomes available for players in the NFL. So if you're saying I'm signing for you for 2026, well, the cap might be 300 million by then, the way it's going up. So y'all need to, build that in, and I need to be getting paid 45 million by that point or whatever. And it's so much easier for a team to just say, you know what, we'll just do the 2 years, build around what the outlook of the salary cap is now, the money is now. And that's where all this business just goes haywire and all these negotiations, because, Kirk wants that security, but he also wants that money. And I think Kirk says the right things. Last time we talked to him at the end of the season, he said structure is more important to me than overall dollar value. But you still need to get paid more than Daniel Jones, who makes 40 million. That means if you're the Vikings, are you going to be paying 41 guaranteed for the next 2 years, 82 million guaranteed up front? Like you said, I wouldn't be shocked if this is going to be more of a 1 year and then a trigger for the next year of if he's on the roster the third day of the league year, then he gets guaranteed 2025, because he knows what they're doing. He knows they're looking at the draft prospect quarterbacks. He knows they want to pick the next guy, and he's going to be mindful of essentially getting replaced while he's still on the roster.
Let's talk about some of those kind of next wave guys, because they'll talk to you guys on Friday, then throw on Saturday. Now, the top three guys aren't there, right? They're not throwing there, at least. There's no Caleb Williams, no Drake May, no Jaden Daniels, but kind of that next wave, the ones that almost certainly would be there for the Vikings at number 11, J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix, Michael Penix. Those guys would be available at 11, maybe even at 42, or with a trade up from 42 to get back into a certain spot. Those guys are there. Those guys are going to throw. What do we think about them? What do we think they think about them at this point?
Yeah, they're keeping a lot of that very guarded. I do think, from what we've heard, there's a line obviously on the first round prospects of who they view worthy of a first round pick. I'm not sure somebody like Bo Nix reaches that mark. I absolutely think that their evaluation of J.J. McCarthy does meet that mark. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not they feel like they need to trade up from 11 for a guy like that. And JJ's combine, his on-field drills, his pro day, his interviews, all of that is going to weigh heavily on a team falling in love with him. And it only takes one. If the Denver Broncos at 12 or whatever fall in love with McCarthy and they want to trade up to 6 or trade up to 8, the Vikings have to be mindful of that. And they want to be aggressive. Everybody you talk to says everything we hear from the Vikings is that they want to be incredibly aggressive in getting their next guy, and they know this is the class to do it. They don't think the 2025 draft class was as good. They certainly didn't think the 2023 draft class was as good when they only liked Richardson, Bryce Young, and CJ Stroud. There are more than 3 options they like in this class. I think Jaden Daniels is among them. I think JJ McCarthy is among them. I'm not sure about Michael Penix at this point. I know people like Matt Miller at ESPN have mocked Penix to the Vikings in the second round, and saying that, they would do something like that if they re-sign Kirk, then you can spend a second rounder on a quarterback or whatever. I think they could re-sign Kirk and spend the first rounder on JJ McCarthy. I think they want to invest and be that aggressive about it. And so if I'm a Vikings fan, I'm watching JJ McCarthy very closely through these settings and through the pro day and trying to glean as much as I can about that guy, because when you hear about what he's good at, it matches a lot of what Kevin O'Connell talks about he wants in a quarterback in terms of the mental acuity, the accuracy, the mobility. He has a lot to prove because Michigan did not feature him. It featured Blake Corum. It featured the running game. So I think the Vikings and a lot of teams have questions about this guy of, what kind of throws can he make? What kind of positions can we put him in? And frankly, so much of this is gambling. You don't know until you get the guy in your building and you've already drafted him, and then you learn even more about him. So it's going to be fascinating, but I do think that it's more than just the top 3 guys they're looking at.
And oh, by the way, they have the best receiver in football who wants an extension. They've got one of the best edge rushers in football who's a free agent. They've got massive holes to fill on both sides of the ball. What else did they say this week that kind of gives you any hints or clues about where any of that is going?
Yeah, it was interesting to hear that, all the quote unquote steam about a Justin Jefferson trade. Kwesi was asked about it. He said that has not once crossed my mind. He said, you keep, blue chip players like that. And I tend to believe him. This is lying season. So many GMs and coaches are standing up there and just lying to you right to your face. But there's little reason to believe, because we haven't heard anything behind the scenes about them shopping him around or anybody being interested or them even picking up the phone to entertain that kind of notion. They very much still want to extend Justin Jefferson with a new contract. They think they can. But frankly, the deadline for this might not be until he puts pads on again in August. This might drag out a while, or they could get it done in April. To me, what we've heard is that Jefferson's camp wants to wait as long as possible to get what they want. And the Vikings want to get this done as soon as possible so that there's no risk of another Nick Bosa upping the market for non-quarterback players, because that's the mark that Jefferson wants to hit. He wants to be the highest paid non-quarterback. That's at $34 million. Well, what Kwesi said is we believe he should be compensated as one of the highest paid non-quarterbacks. That does not mean topping $34 million a year. Keep in mind, Tyreek Hill sets the ceiling for wide receivers at $30 million a year. I think that $30 to $34 million window per year is what they're fighting over, of how high are they going to get in that. And behind everybody is Jamar Chase and the Cincinnati Bengals waiting for Justin to set the floor for him because he wants to top that. So I don't think there's much concern about Jamar Chase raising Jefferson's floor, because the opposite is occurring where Chase is waiting for Jefferson. So that's not going to happen. It's just a matter of, does an edge rusher, does somebody get paid more than $34 million to screw that up? Otherwise, the Vikings might be comfortable of drawing their line and waiting and probably expecting Jefferson to sign that contract come this summer before he plays again. So the one person I'm not as confident about of returning to Minnesota is Danielle Hunter. It seems like to me, from what both Kwesi said on the record and what we've heard behind the scenes, is that Danielle Hunter wants every last dollar that this free agent market is willing to offer. We've heard everything from the Bears are interested, the Lions are interested. It's hard to tell what's true and what's not at this point. But after he had 15 and a half sacks or whatever it was, he's going to have a lot of interest. He's healthy. He's the kind of guy that you don't need to worry about aging poorly. If I had to bet, I think there's going to be another team that comes along and makes him a bigger offer. And he's not going to be, to my understanding, he's not going to be giving the Vikings any kind of discount.
Royal Credit Union's smart checking accounts offer no monthly fees and no minimum balance. Enjoy financial freedom when you open your Royal Credit Union smart checking account online at rcu.org/go checking. Insured by NCUA.
The Lions almost made the Super Bowl. The Packers rallied, made the playoffs, won a playoff game. The Bears are going to have first pick in the draft. They have another high pick. They're a team that a lot of people think are on the rise. How much of that should factor into their kind of short to medium term thinking? I mean, we're talking about a lot of good players that they could bring back for a lot of money. There's also a school of thought that says, hey, it's going to be tough to compete in 2024 no matter what. Should we be thinking a little bit further into the future with our planning?
Yeah, exactly. And why should we be paying Danielle Hunter a 5-year deal when we're not going to be relevant until the third year of that, and he's 31 or whatever, 32? Yeah, I totally get it. And I think that's part of it. And also look at this roster. Look how much work it has to do. I asked Kwesi on Tuesday about the defensive depth chart. How did you evaluate it with the ebbs and flows of how good they played it sometimes and how poorly they did? And he owned up to it and said, we didn't have enough depth. That's on me. We need to stock this roster better. And they've got so much work to do on that side of the ball that even with Brian Flores staying, I'm not sure how they immediately become a difference-making defense. This is going to take a year, 2 years, potentially 3 of roster moves to restock that group on that side of the ball. Offensively, they're absolutely built to win now. You can find a running back anywhere. You could stumble into an Isaiah Pacheco, a Chris Carson in the 7th round. You can sign a Devin Singletary and get almost 1,000 yards from a guy who's very underrated. You can fix that quickly. And I don't know if there's a lot of coaching that needs to improve on that side of the ball too. But this past game, these weapons, if you bring Kirk back, you draft a rookie who can sit a year and kind of develop, they can absolutely compete with anybody by year 2 or year 3 of that rookie's career with the weapons they have around him. It's just a question of, can Kwesi essentially save his job or show the Wilfs why he deserves to keep this job beyond his first contract? Because outside of Addison and Hawkinson, there have been little reason to think that Kwesi deserves the benefit of the doubt. They need to start hitting on some of these draft picks, specifically on defense. And I wouldn't be shocked if he's going to lean heavily on Brian Flores to do that.
Final thought here, away from the Vikings to the Gophers. You caught up with some of their draft prospects. You listened in on some of what they had to say on Thursday. I mean, Tyler Nubin, excellent prospect, had a really good final season with the Gophers. Where are we at with the Gophers players?
Yeah, there's just the 2 of them, but Tyler Nubin might be the best safety of this draft class. It doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a first-round pick. That is a position that, outside of Kyle Hamilton recently, teams are generally okay to wait on in the draft. So he might have to wait until day 2 or day 3. But he's a guy that a lot of scouts, a lot of analysts really, really like in terms of what he brings. Obviously, he's got the interception record for the Gophers. The stats, the production all speak for itself. But he's rehabbing right now and he's going through an injury. So I'm not sure he's going to do everything in the on-field drills at the combine. But people are going to want to see his testing numbers, see his athleticism numbers, because he's got all the intangibles. He's got the leadership. He's got the mentality. Everything out that you hear from people at the University of Minnesota is nothing but love for this kid. And so I think the NFL evaluators will fall for him. It's just a matter of, with his positional value, I don't know if that's really going to be a first-round pick. And Brevin Spanford is in a pretty loaded tight end class. That's the problem for him, is that Brock Bowers, we're talking to Spanford as Brock Bowers is also talking. And it felt like everybody who's ever covered the SEC was over there. It was like 200 media members surrounding Brock Bowers. It was probably only like 40, but it was a lot of media members surrounding Brock Bowers. And it's like 3 of us talking to Brevin. And then you've got a bunch of other guys. I can't name them all right now, but I know there are a lot of other tight ends who were pretty heralded in this class, much like last year's. So I think he's going to be waiting quite a while, but he's also one of those just freak athletes. He was a high school wide receiver coming in, transitioned to being a tight end, put on a lot of weight, and became a decent blocker for a run-heavy offense. He'll land on a team. He'll get drafted. It'll probably be day 3, though. It's just cool to see these guys down here because they're still talking about Antoine Winfield Jr. They're talking about Ko Keith. They're talking about Max Williams, guys who went through this process, who are talking to them this week and telling them tips and things to learn from and what to do. We're not too used to having Gophers go to the combine for 4 straight years or whatever it's been. So there's at least a little bit of relevance for the University of Minnesota here in Indianapolis.
Absolutely. Well, we'll follow that. We'll follow whatever the quarterbacks do on Friday and Saturday. Like you said, follow J.J. McCarthy particularly closely if you're a Vikings fan, because that feels like maybe that's the quarterback that fits the sweet spot of they think highly enough of him that he could be a first-round pick, and he would also be available probably when they're picking, or at least gettable where they're picking, and an opportunity maybe there. It's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out, Andrew. I'm sure this is not the last time we're going to talk in the next few weeks, but appreciate you hopping on, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good, Mike. Thanks.
Great stuff from Andrew, and a postscript to our conversation. We talked, kind of late in the afternoon on Thursday, but then Thursday evening, news coming out of the Vikings that Alexander Mattison is going to be released by the Vikings. The running back who started the year as their starter last year, ran for over 700 yards last year, but didn't really get on track in a lot of different ways. Replaced later in the year by Ty Chandler, who seemed to have a little bit more juice. Probably should have realized that this was the end of the road for Alexander Mattison when I read the story the other day, right? This is kind of his, I keep thinking this is his puppet show and Spinal Tap moment. If any of you were old enough to remember this is Spinal Tap, when that fictional band kind of got to the end of their journey and they were playing, they used to be playing sold out arenas, and then they were playing this kind of small community area, and they're on the marquee. It said Puppet Show and Spinal Tap. This was Alexander Mattison's Puppet Show and Spinal Tap moment, with Kevin O'Connell talking about the running backs earlier this week. Here's a quote from the Star Tribune story. "It's always a position that I think, whether free agency or the draft, you're looking to continue to infuse talent and different skill sets. But we feel good about what those guys were able to do, and more importantly, what we can build on from there, specifically with Ty towards the end of the season." Okay, that was not great. He also said he praised Chandler as a real positive, adding that Mattison ran hard. Okay, that's your consolation prize right there. That is your Puppet Show and Spinal Tap. We know where the top billing was. We could probably read between the lines at that point that he was not long for this team. So Alexander Mattison, one of the good dudes, one of the good guys on the team. You hate to see that happen, but he just did not produce last year, had fumbles, didn't really give them what they were hoping for, and he will not be on the 2024 Vikings. Finally, let's finish with the cooler. Caitlin Clark, the Iowa basketball star, who will be back next week for the Big Ten women's basketball tournament. She's turning pro. No surprise, but she could have come back for one more year with Iowa because of the COVID year of eligibility, things like that. She announced on Thursday that she is going to enter the WNBA draft. Will be almost assuredly 99.999, however many nines you want in that, will be the number one overall pick. She's just a phenomenal, amazing player, and she will be in the WNBA draft next year. So look for that. Look for her in the league next year and see how she does against the pro competition. That will do it for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed everything for the past week. Back at it again on Monday with Royce. I'm Michael Rand.